Well, hello, everyone. Dave coming at you with another episode of the Believe podcast. I've been told by myself, because I've heard myself in recordings, to stand back a little bit from the from the microphone, because the plosives were literally like exploding my eardrums when I was playing back those first two episodes, so I apologize for that. This is episode 3. And let's talk about stress, baby. Let's talk about stress, you and me. This is, as promised, at the end of the last episode, I promised to get into more of the hard-hitting topics. And here we go with my first one here. And I decided to make it all about stress, because it is a super difficult topic for, I think, a lot of people, pretty much everybody, right? And let's not exclude the young ones in our lives as well here. It's not just for the adults in the room. It's for pretty much everybody. Everybody kind of goes through. It's the silent killer, much like carbon monoxide is in your home. So, it's an extreme example, but at the same time, relevant nonetheless. Stress can take years off of your life, and it's not as immediate of an impact as carbon monoxide poisoning would be, but it definitely is the silent killer. It kills you over time, right? It builds up, it manifests, and it kind of erodes you over time. So, much like I'm going to do in pretty much every single episode, I'm going to, always a beginning, middle, and end. I'm going to have, the real world implications of this. I'm going to have my own personal anecdote, and then, what my advice is on how to try to deal with it in your lives. And then obviously, roping in the whole faith aspect into this as well here. And I didn't forget this time, so that's good to remind you. I always want to do it in the beginning and at the end of an episode, so here's the reminder at the top of the episode here. Hit up the comments in YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Let me know your thoughts on stress and how it impacts you from a day-to-day basis. I'm going to follow this up again at the end of the episode here and get into it a little bit more to try and pull some of those comments out of you folks. All right, stress here. Oh, man, I have to take a deep breath even just thinking about this and in talking about it, because just thinking about it can stir up some stress, right? Like, you kind of have to, calm yourself down just even thinking about the topic. But it is definitely a difficult one to talk about. It's not easy, right? It's something that everybody has dealt with at one point or another, and it never really goes away, right? Was it the ancient one from Doctor Strange? We don't learn to completely get rid of our demons. We just learn to live above them, kind of deal, right? Because the same thing here. It's not like, let me practice some techniques and stress is gone forever, right? No, that's not how it works, right? It kind of sneaks up on you in multiple different ways and different forms throughout different eras of your life, it seems like. So let's dive into a little bit about that from an everyday perspective. It can come in a lot of different shapes and forms, as I already said, right? All right, let's throw some examples out there. Let's say you have a crazy commute for work where you've got at least an hour and a half commute each way daily, which I've had, and it stinks. You could have, I don't know, one or two little kids, or one newborn and one, terrible two kind of kid at home who is running around terrorizing the house, and you haven't been able to sleep for the last 3 to 5 months or however long it takes. I don't have kids, so you might be able to ascertain that based on what I'm saying, but I do have experience with them. Or what else? You could have a stressful job situation, particular here too, not diving too deep in on it, but in this day and age of AI taking jobs, despite what a lot of people have said to the contrary of like, oh, this is a new technology that we just need to embrace and it'll provide new jobs in the future. I don't know if I really believe that, but I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. We could probably save that for another time. But it is definitely taking jobs. I've seen it, not only personally, but with other people in my life as well. It's a very scary thing nowadays. So that provides a lot of stress, right? Just in the form of, what does job security even look like nowadays? Is it such a thing that we can even think about anymore, or is it completely extinct at this point? So that can be really stressful. Money can be very stressful, not only about losing your job, but just with other things, right? Either being strapped for cash, or maybe you're a homeowner and things just break when you don't want them to, and you have to dig into your savings to pay off things that you weren't expecting to, right? Or maybe you have to dig into the savings to pay for braces for your kids or whatever. There's a lot of different forms that stress can take, and you may be one of those people that deals with 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 of those things that I had just mentioned all together, which would be kind of insane to try to stack all of those up together, but maybe you're dealing with all of that. Bottom line, it's not fun, right? It stinks, and how do we deal with it? And I was thinking about that when I was thinking about how to structure this episode, and I think I'll save that for the end. So we'll kind of build up to that at the end of the episode here for tips on how to you deal with it, mitigate. I was trying to think of the right adjective or the word there to use. I guess, deal with it, mitigate it, and hopefully eliminate it. Maybe we'll be able to do that. But it seems to be a thing of just humanity in general, from every race, culture, creed, what have you. We all deal with our own forms of stress at different points in our lives. Okay, so that's, just the precursor there to whet the appetite. It's just a little teaser for that for you there. Now let's head on over into, I guess, more of my personal... should I do that first, or should I do the whole faith-based portion of it? I think I'll say, I'll do my personal anecdotes now for you guys, and then I'll head on over into, the faith-based portion of it before wrapping up into trying to get some solutions in there. All right, so my own personal bouts of stress. I always like, picking topics for this podcast that have personal anecdote, and probably almost all the topics that I've picked so far do. So I like making it a little bit more personal. I don't mind sharing these different events from my life and different bouts of different things that I've come in contact with. And I'm definitely no stranger to stress. I've had different forms of it along the way. Relationship type stress with one of my exes, and ongoing stress with my wife and my family right now and the home life. But I think the biggest thing that stands out, I think that the one that I'll share today with you guys is going to be probably the worst instance of stress that I've witnessed to date. And that was around my job. So I think I've told you in a previous episode that I am a transplant. So I've moved from the East Coast over to the West Coast for work. I've lived the majority of my life, close to 30 years, in New Jersey. And I moved out to California for work in 2016. So going on close to 10 years ago now. And I was here for about a year. I got hired as a manager, sort of like a mid-level manager type of role, and was just doing the day-to-day, right? I was just doing the day-in, day-out stuff, and just, trying to get acclimated to my new role. right? So it was definitely different from the role that I was coming from, but not a completely different industry, right? So I work in the communications industry. I won't get into specifics because I'm not sure how that kind of kicks back on you in regards to, I don't know, the contracts that you sign with your employer kind of thing. So I won't dive into the specific names or anything, but still within the communications field. Okay. And I guess I was on the job for at least maybe eight to 10 months or so. And, wasn't thinking anything of it, just kind of trying to go through the motions. And all of a sudden I started to get like symptoms of what would eventually be stress, and what I figured out was stress. However, when they first started manifesting in that way, it was kind of scary. Like I didn't actually know what it was all about and where it was coming from, because I haven't dealt with that level of stress before that point ever in my life. Now, the example that I'm going to give you is probably more of an extreme example, but hopefully this can give some folks a heads up as to what can actually happen, because it can be quite scary. And going through this whole experience, I learned from my father in particular what he kind of dealt with as well. But I still think my case was just a tad more extreme. However, it's not a contest, right? That's the other thing that I want to say here, is that much like, I don't know, somebody who's a smoker or somebody who eventually gets diabetes or whatever, everybody's different. Everybody's genetic makeup is different, and the body breaks down at different times. So again, my own personal anecdotes are going to be different from yours or somebody else's, right? And just because, I went through a particular series or slew of incidences doesn't necessarily mean that you will go through that, right? So I always like to bring up my wife as well. My wife, here's another example. My wife has a job where she's very active and very talkative and in a ton of meetings. She has a remote job, but she's in a ton of like virtual meetings nearly every single day. Now, I already told you guys, I'm an introvert, so if I had to go through that type of job, I would have imploded, exploded, or both for, at a really early stage. And there's no way that I could do the job that my wife does, because that's just not me. I like to have maybe a couple meetings here or there at my job and then just leave me alone, right? I like my production tasks, I like my special projects tasks, but I like the focus time more so than anything. I don't like that huge balance or that swing over to, talking with a lot of people. And you might be able to tell where I'm going with this here. In this manager role that I was hired to do, that's essentially what I was doing, making a lot of decisions for your team, cultivating a team. I had a couple of direct reports underneath me, cultivating their futures, thinking about that, doing the whole review process, blah 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 blah. So pretty different than the environment that I was coming from. And eventually that all got to me. And I'm trying to like backtrack and give you guys all the details of how it kind of unraveled. I think the first, we'll get into the physical symptoms right now. The first symptoms that I got were not being able to sleep, waking up throughout various points throughout the night and just not being able to go back to sleep. And then very shortly after that, I had what's known, I had to look it up because I didn't even know what it was at the time. It's known as paresthesia, I believe is how you pronounce it. Could be saying that wrong. But basically what that is you feel like bugs are kind of crawling on your skin. And it wasn't really like that, but it kind of feels like, when you have a bug that's, sitting on your arm or something like that, it sort of felt like that, where, not that they were like crawling all over, but it felt like, something was on my skin. And that's just, a heightened sensory thing that you get when you kind of go through a lot of stress. After that point, I was getting lethargic in my forearms and in other muscle groups. And, the sleepless nights just continued and just not being able to feel well rested. I also, at a certain point, had hives that I was starting to break out on my body, just like random parts of my body, mostly in my torso. And I have like like photo proof. I was like, I had to take pictures of this stuff too, because I didn't know, was it environmental? Was it in my apartment? I had no idea. Like, your brain starts racing. You go down the whole WebMD rabbit hole and everything. You start freaking out, right, about this stuff, because you're like, what the heck is going on here? And then after that point, what else was there? There was night sweats, where even if I did get a few hours of sleep, I'd wake up and, my pillow would be drenched in sweat at night. That was the final straw for me as well, but I'll get to that in a second. And then panic attacks started to hit. And then all of a sudden, once those started to hit, if you've ever dealt with any kind of anxiety and panic before, I am a creature of anxiety. That is one of my crosses to bear. It's something that I deal with every single day, but I'll get into that again in the future with you guys a little bit more deeply there. But I started to get, panic attacks, and then all of a sudden I started to have to take days off from work here or there. I had to, just leave. I had to, get out, because, if you ever had a panic attack, you have to get to, a quiet, safe space to just, unwind. You can't just be in the mix all the time, and you got to get away. And that was the bulk of it right there. Okay, the last straw was again. I don't want to dive too far down the personal anecdote here, so I'll try to wrap it up right here for you guys. But I also had jaw surgery at some point, and then I had braces, and this was a couple of years after that, a couple of years removed from that. And I think a lot of folks deal with this as well. When you have braces, your gums, especially in the front, either on the top and or bottom, mine were on the bottom, start to recede. So right around when all of this was happening, I also had a procedure done under local anesthesia. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details, but essentially, it was a skin graft to try and rebuild that gum tissue. Why am I bringing this up? Well, that just kind of adds to the stress. It adds to what I was going through, but at the same time, the I don't know what you want to call it. It's not diagnosis. It's the recommendation for recovery is to not do anything physical at the time. Okay, and I decided after, and you have to do that for I don't know how many weeks. I think it's at least a few weeks, and I think I was getting towards the end of that as far as healing goes. But I got to a point where I was dealing with all this stress and anxiety and all this other kind of stuff, and these weird manifestations and hives and blah 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 blah, and I got to a point where I was just like, all right, screw this. I'm going to go to the gym anyway. I'm just going to, even though I'm exhausted, even though I can't sleep, I'm just going to try to do some exercise. So I did, and I ended up getting probably one of the best nights sleep. However, I woke up, my pillow was completely drenched. And the graph where they ended up taking the sample for the graph, which is the roof of your mouth, the palate of your mouth, started to bleed. So I started to freak out about that as well. It was actually, I think those are two separate instances. I think I started to bleed first, and then I had to call the ambulance because it wouldn't stop bleeding and everything. I didn't know how to make it stop, and had to go to the ER for that. Turns out, just put pressure on it if something like that happens. But again, I was freaking out because I didn't know. And then shortly after that, I ended up waking up with just a huge pool of sweat. Almost my entire pillow was covered. I woke up, and again, that triggered me too, and I was freaking out about that. Anyway, long story short, got to a point where I was like, I gotta go home. I didn't really have anybody out here. I wasn't dating anybody at the time. Didn't have a ton of friends or whatever. So I was like, I got to go home. And I went back home. I went and stayed with my folks and told my employer, I was like, I got to go. And it's just I'm dealing with some hell stuff right now, but I just have to go. And I did. That's exactly what I did. So I went back home and I tried to seek some solace and find some answers. I won't get into the whole treatment plan and everything that I went through to try and recover from it. Obviously I did, and I bounced back. But it was a decently long road to not only get to that point where I was starting to manifest problems from the stress, but then it also took a decent amount of time, months, for me to come down from that, recuperate from that, and then try to move forward from it. So all of that was to tell you my own personal example of it. I'll get into what I did to kind of recuperate in the solutions-based portion of it, but let's take a quick look at the faith side of things, right? Because that's why I decided to create this podcast, was to rope in different things regarding our faith and how we want to look at it from that perspective. And honestly, I got to be honest with you, when I was going through all of this, I do believe that I was still going to church at the time, but I wasn't really trying to connect the dots and trying to find answers in my faith. And I think that was a mistake. I think I definitely should have tried to come to some sort of peace and some sort of zen, right, through my faith. So how do we find that with God and with Jesus? Well, Jesus has always preached love and humility and peace, but I think it's somewhat of a gray area there to see how he was able to achieve that, right? We're taught that like all of the answers can be found in the Lord, and giving up those stress, just releasing all of that onto the higher power there is the route to go. But how do you really go about that? I think faith can help us to wrangle some of the solutions that I'm going to talk about in a second into a clearer picture. And I think that's what we need to do. Is sometimes, it's funny when you hear the saying, but the whole thing where, Jesus take the wheel kind of thing, you kind of do have to seek guidance, go to prayer, go to confession, try to unleash some of this stuff, try to confide in other people as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be religious people, religious figures, priests, or what have you. It could be other people that you feel like you could bounce a lot of personal stuff off of. Like in my own personal example, I went home and stayed with my folks because I felt like they could help me provide some guidance in that regard. And turns out I did learn a lot from my dad and what he was going with, because he went through, something similar when he had his own law firm. He was trying to start his own law firm. He had us kids. He had me and my brother at home, and he had a lot of pressure to try and provide for his family. So, like being able to confide in people that you're familiar with and comfortable with definitely helps there as well. And I think, this sense of community and, role models can really help with trying to navigate some of these unknown waters, right? Because I was super scared. I had no clue what was going on because I hadn't dealt with that before. So I was trying to blame like everything else. I was trying to find all these other answers, going like, it was in my apartment, or I had bed bugs, or, something was in the HVAC system. I was trying to point to like not materialistic, but like environmental factors, right, to provide me with answers. When, one of the first GPs that I went to literally said, "You're just dealing with stress. Like, that's what it is." But I was like, no, it can't be that, because I've been on the job for almost a year. I've been here, and, nothing really else has changed in my life and everything. I didn't really want to believe it because I didn't think it was true, because I was already in the ebb and flow of like the day to day. So I just didn't piece that together, and it took me a little bit of time to go, I guess it really was the work stress that was kind of getting to me. But getting back to the religious side of things, how to find peace through faith. I mean, I find a lot of peace through faith. Almost every single week when I go to church, it's something weird that kind of overcomes me. Maybe you feel this too, but at a certain point throughout the Mass, I do feel a certain wave of peace that kind of washes over you, right? For lack of a better term or metaphor there. You do kind of feel something just flow through you. Maybe you felt this, maybe you haven't, I don't know. I'm sure other people have in their experiences at a Mass or at church, but I definitely feel it just about every single time that I go, where it almost feels like a weight is lifted off of your shoulders, right? I can't really explain it. I can't really break it down for like the science nerds out there, because you really can't for things like this. But all that to say is that, church and Mass can definitely feel like a weight being lifted off of your shoulders, almost like a weekly reset kind of thing, right? And like I said, I can't really explain it. It just hits me out of the blue at a certain point in Mass, and I can feel a weight or a heaviness and that anxiety just kind of slip away. And I'm not necessarily saying that like, oh man, like I'm completely de-stressed, like, after you go for a massage or something like that, where you feel like a huge reset kind of thing. No, and it might not last for very long, might not even last like an hour kind of thing, but it's definitely noticeable. Like I could feel it. So maybe you've had that experience too. But that is definitely a way to not necessarily deal with stress, but come to a certain sense of peace within your faith. The other thing I'll say there too is that you definitely do have to give up all of these problems and these stresses and present them in a certain way, usually through prayer, to God, and go, hey, this is what I'm dealing with right now. Can you help me out? And it's a heavy weight on my shoulders right now. Help me to find the guidance to try and get through this, and put it up there into the universe and see what comes back for you. And I think a lot of times, and I got to save this for another episode as well, but getting answers to things, right, is usually not in the way that you expect. It's usually not on the timeline that you expect. But when you look back on certain things and events and how they unfolded in your life, you can kind of usually at some point look around and go, okay, God, I see what you did there. It's not probably how I would do it. It's not how I would expect it usually, right? But it ends up unfolding. Things unfold as they should, and you'll get the answers, if not always in the way that you expect them to arrive at your doorstep. So that's all I'll say there from a faith-based perspective. Just try to unload that and give that up to the higher power and say, hey, Lord, can you try to take some of this off of my plate, or help me to find clarity, or a way to deal with it, or a way around it, or whatever. Like try to find different ways that you can, ask for guidance in your faith that way. All right, so potential solutions here to try and wrap this one up. And what have I found? Well, to go back to my story, because some of you might be wondering, well, how did you end up getting through it, and how did you find some answers there? Well, I went the conventional route, which I don't recommend. I am more of a holistic kind of a natural remedy first kind of minded person, where I really do believe that you should try to fix whatever you can from the inside out first. That's why you'll probably hear me say on this podcast more than once, probably ad nauseum to a certain degree, that low carb eating is the way for me. And honestly, guys, I would definitely, first and foremost, always recommend, and it's going to sound cliche and boring, and I'm sorry it's not like the magic pill that you might be thinking about here, but diet and exercise. Honestly, you have to be able to be in a good place first and have a solid foundation, because if the foundation is out of whack, I can't even imagine what I would have been had I not been leading a pretty much more healthy lifestyle at the time. Now, I'm not, jacked, I'm not, super ripped or whatever, But, I was eating more of a low carb lifestyle, so my diet was pretty decent. I'm, I guess, what's known as a teetotaler as well, so I don't drink. And I would also recommend not smoking, which are, two of the vices. I know, I'm sorry, but, two of the vices that I think a lot of people turn to are drugs and alcohol. The Mary J, right? The weed is now legal. And a lot of people are probably turning to that in one form or another, whether it's smoking or edibles or whatever. And I don't recommend that. I think probably the vast majority, even more, are going towards some form of alcohol, tying one on, as they say, 1 or 2 beers after your shift, right? Trying to use that to unwind. But the reason why I bring up the whole diet thing first before getting into exercise is because none of that stuff, I think everybody knows this too, like it's going to do more hurt than it does good in the long run. A glass of wine here and there, get some antioxidants and tannins in there, perfect, right? But slamming a 40 on your way, hopefully not on your way home, but when you get home to try and fall asleep is still not good, right? And in one way you're destroying your liver, and the other way you're destroying your lungs, right? So none of it is really good when it comes to your overall health. And a lot of people might be thinking about it from a perspective of like, well, I just need to get through this phase of my life or whatever, right? Like I just need to get through this section or this period. So let me go towards those options. I would recommend not doing that and trying alternative methods that I'll get into in a second. So the other portion of this is exercise, right? And this was the thing, if you were following along with my story, that kind of fell off the rails for me. And the reason why is because when stress starts to build, right, it's like a reverse gas tank, right? Like, the pressure builds in the tank slowly over time with stress, right? It builds and builds and builds until it gets to that point where, it not necessarily dramatically like explodes, but it starts leaking out and getting all these nasty side effects like I was undergoing, right? And, one of the first things that I had mentioned in my story was that I wasn't able to sleep, or that sleep was eluding me, right? It was difficult for me to stay asleep, and that all deals with stress as well, too. You take that stress from whatever environment it originated in into the other aspects of your life, and for me, it included sleep, right? On a more subconscious level, I was still probably replaying things through my head, and it was preventing me from getting sleep. So what ends up happening at that point, I think a natural reaction is you go, okay, I'm going to try to go to bed early, or I'm going to try to unwind, meditate, do some yoga or whatever. Trust me, I tried all that stuff, guys. I tried the white noise machine at night. I tried a beach soundtrack with a blindfold and the speakers and the blindfold. Trust me, I tried a bunch. And none of that stuff really worked for me personally. I'm not necessarily saying don't do or don't try any of those things, but it didn't really work for me because that wasn't really getting to the root of the issue. And I will say, in getting into the solutions here, brushing with the solutions, one of the biggest things that has helped me, and I can't say that it's going to 100% work for everybody, but for me, what has really worked is exercise. Now, I thought I was decently in shape and was doing exercise at the time. However, when I started to get a lack of sleep, you feel like, oh, I'm so tired, I'm so sluggish throughout the day. I just want to have one solid night's sleep, and then I'll get back to exercising and blah 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 blah. And what I'm going to tell you right now is, especially if you're going through something similar, you need to exercise regardless. Stick to a certain kind of regimen for yourself. I'm not going to necessarily say exactly what I think you should do, but you should still exercise, even if you are feeling exhausted and tired, even if you only got like a few hours of sleep. Now, you still have to be safe. I'm not necessarily saying like, hey, go, start running out in the middle of traffic or whatever. Like, no. Still be safe with it. Don't make it dangerous, right? Don't do anything super crazy or strenuous. But what I will recommend is something above basic anaerobic, like walking or anything like that. Any of the low level things, I would say, is it's great. You should definitely continue doing that stuff, but that's not really what I'm talking about here. I am recommending more so in the realm of keeping your heart rate up a little bit. And, primarily for exercises that are low impact. I mean, if you're young enough, by all means, play basketball, football, whatever, go out for a run or whatever. But low impact stuff you can probably do until you're incapacitated, until you can't really walk anymore. You can do low impact exercise. I'm talking about elliptical. I'm talking about biking. If you like the water, get in the water and do some swimming. If you like rowing, hop on the rowing machine. Things that don't have high impact on your joints is essentially what I'm saying. But at the same time, gets that heart rate up higher than that, moving slow at a steady pace kind of thing. And again, nothing wrong with doing that, but I think you need to do a little bit more. And the reason why I say that is because much like the internal part of stress can build from a mental state or an emotional state, there's also the other side of the coin, which is the physical state of things, right? Like I was saying, the physical manifestations that started happening because essentially, and my rheumatologist was correct in saying that, I want to quote him here. He was saying, essentially what's happening is your nerves are on fire, right? Your nerve endings are on fire. That's why you're feeling all of these things. That's why you're breaking out and all these other kind of things, because your nervous system is going haywire. And by using physical exercise and getting that heart rate elevated, you're helping to deplete all of that. Now, this isn't a cure-all. This isn't me saying, if you're dealing with a ton of different stress, all you got to do is, some elevated heart rate exercises a few times a week. No, it's not a cure-all. It's a way to mitigate it. It's a way to deal with some of it, but it's not getting to the root cause of what it is. And that's one of the biggest suggestions that I'd have to say right from the get-go here is the first thing you have to do is identify what is wrong. Now, for a lot of folks out there, you're probably scoffing, going like, oh yeah, that's easy, right? It's, my newborn kids, or it's my high stress job, or you already know, you already have it pinpointed and you're sitting there going like, I got that already, give me the answers, right? So hold on a second, because for some folks, including myself too, I didn't have that level of stress at my job before, so I didn't know what it was and I didn't know how to identify it. So it kind of came out of the blue. So my very first step was to identify what was wrong and figure out that it was my job as the source of stress that was causing all of these problems in my life. Okay, and that could be the very first step for a lot of folks, maybe people who are listening to this, to identify what it is that's wrong first. After you identify what it is, then you have to figure out, all right, how do I treat it? Okay, so from my personal example, again, getting back around to that, I treated it the conventional way, which was pills and I won't get into specific names, but you know what I mean. There's anti-anxiety meds, there's things that you can take nowadays to try and deal with it. And that's why I'm saying try not to until it is your absolute last resort. Try to go more of the holistic route. Try exercise, try meditation, all these other things first before waiting for it to get that bad, if you can. By all means. Because I am not an advocate of prescription meds and drugs if you can help it at all. I'm not necessarily saying that it's not great for some people for certain things. I'm just saying if you can try a more holistic approach first, that I think is the way to go first before turning towards prescription meds. Okay? Because they're not that great. Eventually I was able to get off of them and everything, but I can see how people get addicted to those things and it can turn into other problems as well. So that can be a snowball effect that you want to avoid at all costs. So first step, identify what the problem is. Identify what those sources of stress are. Second part, after you've figured that out, is, all right, how do I tackle it now? All right, I know what it is. I know what's there. How do I tackle it? And for a lot of folks, they're going to be sitting there thinking, well, there's nothing I can do about it. I can't give my kid in, right? I can't, I rely on this job as a source of income, even though I hate my boss or my situation or whatever. I still rely on this income for either myself or my family, right? Dependents, right? So, I got to keep doing it kind of thing. Well, in particular for the job, maybe you don't have to. Maybe there is another opportunity. Maybe it's just about in your free time trying to find another opportunity, either within the same organization or trying to find some other job somewhere else. The kid thing, the child stress is not going to go away, that's for sure. But here's my tip on that one. I haven't had kids myself yet. However, I have had decent experience with a niece and nephew at a very young age. Since they were, since one of them was born, I've been in the picture and been around, and the other one since he was very young. So I do have experience there. The biggest tip that I would say for that one, especially for new parents, is depending on how much money you want to spend, there are a lot of objects and things that you can buy to help alleviate some of the stresses that you might run into. And it's really just about preparedness, right? About the procedural things, right? It's not really about, little Johnny dropping his McNugget in the middle of McDonald's and blowing a gasket and an all-out tantrum because of it, right? And everybody's staring at you going like, hey, should we call CPS on this guy? You're right. Not about really the emotional side of things. However, if you can get rid of or alleviate massively the procedural side of things, then that definitely helps out quite a lot. What am I talking about there? Your to-go bag, right? Have it fully stocked. Have wipes everywhere in your car, in that bag, in your office, in every single room of your house. Wipes are one of the best inventions ever. Figure out all the other things that you need. Changes of clothing, right? Get a stroller that can turn into a car seat, that can turn into a sling so that you can go up and down stairs super easy and be able to handle that and go on airplanes, and it packs down into a carry-on size. It fits in the overhead bin. Like, there's so many different things that you can get. Either new or secondhand, that can help alleviate that side of things. So that would be my suggestion for that. Now, that's obviously a very small portion of raising kids, but what I'm trying to get at here is try to chip away at the things that you can, right? Organize things. My wife is a huge organizer, right? Get organizing bins. Get everything organized. Make sure that it's in such a way that, it's easy for you to get to the things that you need quickly, right? So that's very specific, a specific example there as well. What else for alleviating stress? You have to, again, to recap, identify what it is first. That might be the easy part. Second thing is try to figure out ways that you can chip away at making your situation better. A lot of times it really just is, don't stay up until midnight or 1 a.m. Get decent sleep. A lot of times it's just about budgeting those things in your life. If it's a stressful job and you come home and your vice is eating instead of drugs and alcohol, don't eat until 11 o'clock at night. Like, late night eating and then going to bed super late and only getting like 5-6 hours of sleep is not good, right? So, and I think for a lot of people, the issue is really just about mental fortitude, getting on track, getting into a set schedule, and having that mental discipline to stick to those ideas. I think that is going to pay dividends in the long run as well. And that's really up to you. There's nothing that anybody else can do for you in that regard, aside from me just trying to make you aware of it. That's the only thing that you can do on my side of things, is to say, take a look at what is out of whack and what's out of balance in your life and try to address it, try to correct it. A lot of times I think people know what they have to do. They just lack that final step of just doing it, right? Like, just get into the mindset of like, I'm going to do this, and do it. All right. A lot of times it's easier said than done. I understand that. But you have to push through. You have to commit to it. And that's the same thing crossing over into our faith journeys as well here, right? And a lot of times it's about committing to your faith, committing to a higher power and sticking with it through thick and thin. Not dropping it at the first sign of trouble or placing the blame game because God's an easy target or whatever. No, it's about committing to an idea, to your faith, to de-stressing, whatever we want to focus our mindset on. That's what it's about. All right, I feel like that's a good stopping point for this one. I'm trying to think if there's any last minute tidbits that I want to throw in here. I do have another anecdote, a personal example, but I think I'm going to save that one because it didn't necessarily deal with stress, but in my final rambling there, it kind of dealt with that whole, mental fortitude and trying to figure something out in your life. So maybe I'll save that one for another time, another juicy, what is wrong with Dave's past and history and how did he overcome it kind of section of the show here. But I think that's a good roundup for stress. I think, you could talk forever, I think, on this topic. And again, this is just my own personal example of things, and your case might be different. So as I like to wrap up every show here, I want to hear from you guys. Let's talk about the first problematic or tough issue of stress that I'm bringing up today. How have you dealt with stress before? How did it crop up in your life? How did it manifest in other ways? Did it kind of creep out into weird physical ailments like I had? Have you dealt with panic attacks? Have your panic attacks been related to stress? I feel like a lot of times those two go hand in hand. Have you known someone close to you who has dealt with perpetual stress or has gone through an incident in their life? Hopefully not tragic, but hopefully there's a positive outcome to it. I want to know all about it. I want to hear all about it. Again, if you don't want your comment shared, please write that in your comment when you are sharing on, again, either Apple, YouTube, or Spotify, where you can drop some comments. And let's get that discussion going. I want to hear how everybody else deals with stress because I can't be the only one, right? I think this is pretty common with quite a lot of folks, and I want to hear how you deal with it. What are your methods? What did I miss? What is something that really helps you out? Maybe you went down more of that path of like meditation and yoga and all of those other things. And maybe that really worked for you. It didn't really work for me because I get more angry with yoga than actually relieving the stress. But maybe it worked for you. Maybe that's a really good outlet for you. What other forms of de-stressing have you tried that really work for you? Let me hear all about it. I want those comments. I really want to spark up the discussion here. So leave those comments for me. I think I do have a precursor for the next episode for you guys because I'm going to be recording that one right after this one. I think it's time to dive into more of the, biblical side of things. I'm going to start diving into the 10 Commandments next. And obviously there are 10 of them, so be on the lookout for 10 episodes kind of sprinkled here and there, but I figured, it'd be really good to start diving into each one of those and taking a closer look at what they are. So if you're starting from the top, you already know what it is, but be on the lookout for that one in the next episode. Thanks for listening this week, and I will talk to you later.